What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Swift News. Now, this is the show where I take everything I found this week on the internet relating to iOS development, whether that be from Twitter, newsletters, YouTube, basically anything I found. I curate all that, put that into a nice little under 15-minute video for you, just to make sure you guys are all caught up on the world of iOS development. Now, if you like what I'm doing here on Swift News, I put this show out every Monday morning, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to make sure you don't miss an episode. All right, let's get into the news. All right, let's kick things off with Swift 4.2 and it being kind of finalized. So the news here is on April 20th, which was Friday. You can see here, final branching, which means changes will have emerged from master one last time. After the final branch date, there will be a bake period in which only select critical fixes will go into the release. So basically what they're saying is essentially done aside from critical bug fixes. So Swift 4.2 should be released soon. And real quick hat tip to Benjamin Mayo for kind of pointing this out on Twitter. He says, don't know if it's a coincidence or genius, but Swift 4.2.0 is also finalized on 420. And then Slava, who's actually a Swift compiler hacker at Apple, at a bake period as well. So looks like the guys over at the Swift team are having a little fun with the date. But the good news is Swift 4.2 should be coming soon. And as always, our buddy Paul Hudson has us covered. Similar to his Swift 4.1 playground, he's got one for 4.2 that you can download. As always, links will be in the description for all this stuff. Let me pull up his playground real quick. So as you can see, very similar to the playground he did in Swift 4.1 just a couple weeks ago, just with Swift 4.2 stuff. But we go through each of the major changes here and you see the code. Now, the weird thing with this one is there's not an Xcode out that can accept Swift 4.2, so you're going to get a lot of error. My lasagna's ready. So you're going to get a lot of errors unless you download this version of Xcode that you got to do, some hacky stuff to get to. We won't get into that. But it is good just to download and play with, just to at least look at the code. You can kind of reason about, what's going on and what's coming in Swift 4.2, such as the collection of enum cases. Let's see what else we got here. Some more warning and error stuff. The one thing I thought was pretty cool that I always wrote myself here was the Boolean toggling. Like I always had something like this, manually written myself in pretty much all my projects. So now you'll just be able to, boolean.toggle on a boolean that's going to be built in from now. So again, just if you want to preview a Swift 4.2, check out the playground. Paul Hudson also has an article talking about what's coming out, but you pretty much get the gist of it by reading all this stuff here in the playground. And up next, I want to talk about the App Builders Conference that took place in Switzerland this past week. As you can see, April 16th and the 17th. Now, normally conferences take a couple weeks to maybe even a couple months to get their talks in video format and posted so people that weren't at the conference can watch them. However, they had a very fast turnaround and their talks are up on YouTube already. And I want to talk about their YouTube channel here. Again, links in the description. You'll be able to check out all their talks, but I want to talk about a few talks specifically. And we'll start with Tobias Dumonk. I probably butchered that. My apologies, Tobias. But I'll let his talk here play in the background. But this is all about the depth sensing technology using the iPhone X. It's always going to be the X to me. But the cool thing about his talk is his talk wasn't like a keynote presentation. Like it was an app he built on his phone. And he's going through the talk and actually demonstrating, he's going, back and forth into the camera, showing the true depth field and showing you kind of the cool stuff you can do with it here. He gets into the facial recognition stuff, again, just on the iPhone X. But just a real good intro into the true depth stuff and all the stuff you can do with it. And just kind of really blew my mind. It was pretty cool that he did his whole talk from his phone and not like a keynote. Like this is an actual app, like I said, running on his phone. So thought that was pretty cool. And it made me real curious on what I could potentially do with all the true depth stuff. And then kind of building on that, because I had another, this came about separately, another article on true depth. This is a tutorial that just got released this week by Jono Middelfelt. Probably mispronounced that as well. But this is on raywunderlich.com. As you guys know, I always preach this site. Love this site, love the videos, well worth a subscription. Not affiliated. Again, so if Tobias's talk sparks your interest in the true depth technology and you want a more in-depth tutorial on going through it, highly recommend going through this article. It'll give you a real good feel for all the cool stuff you can do with true depth. And again, I'm trying to get to the bottom here where there was this cool little image here. You can get like this comic book background effect, but he has down here where he pops into frame. So like the background is in the comic book effect, and then you can have your foreground not be the comic book effect. So again, just some real cool stuff you can do with True Depth. It's a good intro. Again, disclaimer, I haven't done this tutorial yet, haven't had time yet, but again, it really sparked my curiosity in what I can do with like True Depth and some of the cool stuff. You can see here, he's not even in the picture. Now he's coming into frame. Again, just some cool stuff. Definitely check it out if you are interested in the new True Depth technology. All right, now shifting back to the App Builders Conference, we have our good buddy John Sundell. Didn't feature him last week, but he's now been featured in 4 out of the 5 episodes, but I couldn't not share this. No pun intended. But this video is near and dear to my heart because it's all about sharing your knowledge, putting yourself out there, whether that's a blog, a YouTube channel like myself, or an open source project. But this video is a non-technical video, and it's all about the benefits of sharing. Like not only will it help you, build your network of other iOS developers, or new opportunities can come from it. But really, when you teach something, like you really have to know it, and it helps you learn it to teach something. There was a tweet I retweeted. I'm going to butcher the exact thing, but it's like, if you want to master something, teach it. Because if you can break it down super simple enough to teach it to somebody, then you really know it. But he goes through all the benefits of sharing what you know, and his main thing is like, you don't have to be an expert to share. Like documenting the journey of you learning is valuable to somebody else who's thinking about learning, right? So just because you're not an expert, don't feel hindered that like, oh, I can't share. Like what do I have to say that people are going to care about? His big thing is like, everybody has a unique perspective, and that unique perspective is valuable. So don't be afraid to share that. So if you've been thinking about starting a blog, think about starting a YouTube channel, or that thought has even crossed your mind, definitely check out this video. He gives you tips on like how to start an open source project. Gives you also tips on like blogging and podcasts as well, because he does a podcast. So just a really good non-technical talk on all the benefits of sharing your knowledge and kind of putting yourself out there and becoming a voice in the community. So I love this video. Obviously, it's a little near and dear to me as I'm trying to do that same thing. But again, if you're thinking about it, definitely check it out. In the last talk I wanted to highlight from App Builders was Paul Hudson's Building Modern Swift. Now, I have featured Paul Hudson a lot on this show, and I don't want it to seem like I follow 4 people and just highlight all their stuff. I really follow a lot of different people, but the same names keep popping up, and they put out quality stuff. So gotta share it. But anyway, Paul's talk on writing modern Swift again hit close to home for me, because he starts off with this story about what happens on every WWDC, which is coming up, so it's really pertinent, is they announce all this new stuff, right? And your mind gets blown, and you're like, yes, okay, let's do it. But most apps have to support the current iOS version -1. So the last 2 iOS versions. That's the typical, standard. Every company may be different. But so anything that gets new, for example, all the stuff coming out in iOS 12, like it's cool and all, but you may not be able to implement it until next year because you got to support both, the prior year's iOS. So it's always the conundrum that developers get into. And then by the time that happens, you kind of forget about it, and your excitement goes away. But he talks about how if you're on an older code base, that can keep happening. And then before you know it, your iOS app is just like pretty old. So in this talk, he talks all about all the new modern stuff that's come out in the past, couple iOSs, to kind of like remind you to do that, and to kind of like, hey, look, we have all this modern cool stuff now. Let's start using it. And he goes through all the cool stuff that's out, like things like the new share sheets, WK Web View, Safari View Controller, 3D Touch, Peek and Pop, all the stuff that's come out over the past couple iOSs. It's time to like really modernize your app and start implementing them if you haven't already. And one interesting thing I got out of this was just the power of stack views. Now, don't get me wrong. I know what a stack view is. Obviously, I've used stack views, but after hearing his talk, it's like and it wasn't a talk on stack views. He just kind of mentioned a couple things in passing, but kind of made me realize I wasn't really utilizing stack views to their fullest potential with all these crazy auto layouts and now the seemingly never-ending new screen sizes we're getting, which could potentially get worse if you believe the rumors with the new iPhone X sizes coming out. It's like 3 new screen sizes. So yeah, after I heard this talk, I'm definitely going to start looking into stack views more. And like I said, I use them, but I want to start like really utilizing them to their fullest potential. Moving on, we have an article from Joachim Kurz, again, sorry for the mispronunciations, titled Why You Should Not Name Your IB Actions Did Tap Button. Now, I'm not guilty of this, but I am guilty of the second part of the article, which we'll get to. The reason I'm not guilty of this is because that whole like did do this thing. To me, that just is a delegate pattern, which is what he talks about in the article as well. But I had already had a pet peeve with this before this article. But things like, did tap save button, did hit send, or cancel button tapped. He talks about why those all feel wrong to him. And I thought it was pretty interesting. So like I said, the whole did do this naming pattern, that's kind of reminiscent of what delegates do. So I don't want to confuse my button actions with delegates. So that's kind of the first part. And the second main part of the article that I'm for sure guilty of is doing things like save button tapped. You're tying the UI element to the title of the action. So you shouldn't be doing that. And the reason being is because you could have multiple gestures that actually trigger that event. Maybe you have a swipe gesture that also triggers the save function. So your function should just be called save, not save button tapped. Because again, you want to decouple the UI element name from the action for those reasons, because there's other actions that might trigger that. So I am definitely guilty of this. So for example, I will have a save button tapped, and then if I do create a swipe gesture that does that, I'll just call save button tapped on the swipe gesture. So yeah, I need to get better at that. So that was one key point that I picked up on that I will definitely use to improve it. But I thought it was a pretty good article. Check it out. Next up, we have a quick article. I'm going to use this more as a reference, but this is everything about public and private Swift attributes. Now, I was familiar with the pretty basic attributes that you use all the time, IB outlet, IB action, if you're using storyboards. But this is just a list of all of them and kind of a little brief overview of what they are. Like I said, I'm going to use this more as a reference just to kind of brush up on this stuff, because you go through the entire list and we won't go through it all. But if you're interested in all the attributes there are, both public and private, and kind of when you would use them, like this is a common one in Swift 4 now. I'm sure when you guys all converted to Swift 4, you had at Objective-C, or yeah, I should think that's how you say it, at OBJC popping up everywhere in your code. So, if you want to know why that is, here you go. And yeah, we're just going to go through all the public and private ones. So again, just a quick article that I'm definitely going to reference here and there. All right, and to wrap up this week's episode, we have an article from Alex. We're just going to call him Alex so I don't butcher another last name. Making your iOS applications easy to read with these simple steps. Now, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. One of my biggest priorities when I'm writing my code is to make it easily readable and easy to understand from like a developer just coming into the code base's perspective, because I've jumped into many code bases in my day, and I really, really appreciate easily readable code. So what this article is all about. The way he thinks about it is he groups his types of functions into 4 different types. So an informer function, management function, router function, execution, and he goes through each one. Again, we're not going to go through the whole article right now, but basically, and then you do your naming and grouping accordingly. And then talks about the single responsibility principle. I've seen this in a few code bases. We'll get down to it. Have you ever seen a function that does this, like play and minimize, or load and play? I've seen that a few times. Maybe I've written that once or twice. But just a good reminder to follow that single responsibility principle. And then just talks about how how Swift they changed all their booleans to like is hidden or is enabled, just so it reads very well. And you can see here, if container view is hidden. I mean, that's like a human spoken sentence, rather than computer code. So just a good article on, readability and naming your functions, and something to keep in mind. Again, I love this topic and think it's very, very important. All right, that wraps it up for this week. We'll see you guys next Monday. If you like this episode, go and hit subscribe. Yeah, like I just said, put it out every Monday. See you guys.